Recently, This Is America and the World traveled to the Republic of Benin in West Africa. It's a peaceful, safe, French-speaking country with a population of about 10 million people. Benin is in a strategic location right on the ocean and bordered by Nigeria, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Togo. Once a major port for the West African slave trade, Benin has gone through many political identities over the years and is now a democracy. On this program, an interview with the U.S. Ambassador to Benin, Michael Rayner. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and the F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you, my pleasure. Nice to see you in Benin.
Thank you. Paint a picture of your experience in Benin so people can kind of grab a hold of what catches your eye when you're out.
Right. Well, you know, it's a small country, very, and yet very diverse, geographically and culturally. When I'm down in the south, where we are, you know, where the capital and the main commercial cities are, it bustles as you see urban sprawl, you see traffic jams, and you see
and many motor scooters. And
many motor scooters, exactly. That would be a slightly different kind of traffic jam, but but yes, and so you get a sense of urbanity, which I think you know, if you go out of town, you will see rural Benin, and you will see fields, and you will see villages, and they sort of they sort of fit what Americans picture. You know, you'll see the mud walls and the thatched roofs and the people pounding yams or grains, and it can look idyllic. And maybe for them it is. There seems to be a Beninese tendency to make the best of what you have, and to not look for reasons not to be happy, but rather for reasons to be happy. So you will see people generally expressing that impulse. But then as you go north, you see great lushness. You will see vestiges of forests. You will see those forests under threat due to logging. You will see a lot of small plot farming, again, very subsistence-based, usually surrounding the villages. You'll see a lot of land that looks arable that doesn't really seem to be in production, and you'll wonder if that's economic potential lost as well. And then you'll get to various regional cities and towns, and you'll see cell towers, because you can get cell phone coverage everywhere in this country. And then as you go north from some of those cities in the mid, you will start to see the influence of the Sahel and the Sahara, the fact that things get drier and browner, and culturally it becomes different too. The south tends to be more Christian and the north tends to be more Muslim. So you will see more mosques up north, you will see more women wearing veils. And then when you get to the far north, you'll see a couple of spectacular game parks.
You are ambassador, thank you for your service, to the Republic of Benin.
The Republic of Benin.
Give us the who, what, when, where, and why of Benin.
Okay, it's actually thank you for the chance. It's a really wonderful and sort of underknown history, and I will limit myself to a few highlights, but be happy to.
Please educate us.
Well, you know, if you go back a couple hundred years, some of Africa's most powerful kingdoms were in the land that is now Benin. And amassing great wealth, waging epic battles, very dramatic, very interesting history, developing cultures, dances, songs, traditions that persist to this day. In the mid 1800s, you would have seen some of those kingdoms waging war for the purposes of conquering people and selling them as slaves. And that created lasting ties to countries like Haiti and Brazil, where those citizens of those countries reflect cultural practices that are still prevalent in Benin as well. Then, of course, you had the French colonial era, which played out much as it did in much of Africa, and came to an end, as in much of Africa, in 1960 when Benin became independent. And then you saw about a decade and a half of coups and changes of power. And in Benin's case, they were generally not terribly violent, and yet they were coups nonetheless.
Yes.
And in the mid-70s, president emerged who essentially established a Marxist-Leninist state.
Yes, communist, socialist.
Indeed. State-controlled economy, very, very, much in keeping with the Cold War times. But when Benin really becomes interesting, it becomes more relevant, I think, to us as Americans, is around 1990, 89, 90, 91, when the president, to his credit, president for life, saw that what he was doing wasn't working. Other parts of the society were bringing constructive, peaceful pressure to bear on him, and they convened what's called the National Conference. And this is something that I think could only happen in Africa, and it's one of the wonderful things about Africa, where all of the people of influence came together and talked and said, okay, what do we need to change, and how do we want to emerge? And through this collaborative, peaceful dialogue, in a matter of weeks, Benin emerged from a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship to a multi-party democracy. Democracy, and a real democracy. And the president for life stood for election and lost that election and stood down peacefully and gave the reins of power to the democratically elected successor.
Wow.
First time in Africa that happened. And I think it's a bit of an important and underappreciated part of world history, because it really was a catalyst for a lot of really positive change in Africa and even elsewhere.
What a marvelous, exciting, diverse sense of history, huh?
Yeah.
The people here, what do they do?
Well, they are predominantly on the informal economy, so it's a little hard to say exactly what, but a lot of them are small traders.
Yep.
A lot of them are subsistence growers of agricultural products.
Okay.
And a lot of them are unemployed or underemployed, and that's one of the challenges Benin faces.
Cotton big here, huh?
Cotton is big. It's the biggest cash crop, the most formalized aspect of Beninese agriculture. There are also commercial agriculture in areas like shea butter, pineapples, cashews, but in terms of agriculture, cotton is king here.
How about the idea that 1/3 of the population is living on $1.25 a day? That's an international standard of poverty.
Right.
We're talking about a country of about 10 million people.
10 million people.
French influence, very religious culture.
Indeed.
Yet with this poverty, there seems to be a sense of pain, but also a sense of happiness amongst the people. Not that they're happy being poor, of course, but you know what I mean, that there's a calmness in this country, even though the poverty is there.
Well, it is. That's a very good observation, and I would absolutely agree with it. Benin is a very diverse country. Ethnically, there's about 42 ethnic groups here. Religiously, there are very large Christian population, very large Muslim population, very large population that practices traditional religions.
Voodoo.
Voodoo, the birthplace of voodoo, indeed, is Benin and neighboring Togo. And as I said, it's been a country that's been very good on democracy and respect for human rights, and valuing this sort of tolerance society it's developed for itself for a whole quarter of a century now, since that national conference took place. But it remains incredibly poor, as you said, and that is not something that I would be dismissive of in terms of the impact it has on the country's development or prospects, nor on the impact it has on individual Beninese who struggle to pay for school fees, who struggle to pay for basic health care, who struggle in some cases to pay for food. So the consequences of the poverty are sincere, but they are mitigated by this social network that this country has that goes to what I was mentioning earlier, the sense of interconnectedness. Everyone here has family.
Yes.
No one is going to be on his or her own. No one is going to be on the street abandoned by family. And if you've got family, someone will have enough to help out, and someone will feel the need to help out. And that, again, is not to minimize the very real consequences of poverty, but this is a very, very large mitigating factor.
We traveled a great deal of the country. The roads are very poor. It's a trucking economy, isn't it? Right now, everything seems to be moving by truck. You mentioned the word infrastructure a little while ago. That's really, if I asked you what does Benin want, what does Benin need, it would probably be a heavy investment in infrastructure. Huh?
That is certainly one of them. As you said, their roads are in varying but not terrifically great state. Their rail infrastructure similarly. Electricity is a huge challenge here. And all of these things are holding back economic potential and growth. You mentioned that Benin is a trucking economy. That's actually a very good observation. You were on the road that essentially connects the port of Cotonou
yes.
To the neighboring countries to the north, Niger and Burkina Faso. And in fact, the port is itself the single largest aspect of Benin's economy.
In the capital city.
The port in the capital city accounts for about 40% of government revenues, right off on its own. And that's not because Benin itself is a particularly large market. We mentioned it's about 10 million people, somewhat impoverished, but it is strategically located not only for the countries to the north, but also its giant neighbor to the east, Nigeria.
Yeah. This area, would we characterize this as West Africa? Huh?
This is West Africa.
What should Americans know about Africa?
Oh my. Well, that's a huge question. Africa's a huge and diverse place. But in a nutshell, I think what I would say is that Americans should know that Benin is, or Africa more generally, is really the continent to come, the continent of the future. The youngest population, the biggest untapped economic potential, the next big thing in a way. And I think that that's an aspect of Benin, of Africa, excuse me, that a lot of people don't really recognize. You hear a lot about the tragedies,
yes.
the wars, the illnesses. But this is a continent with enormous potential, and I think that's going to become more and more evident to Americans in the years to come.
You look at a map, I mean, that doesn't really even do it justice. It's a vast continent, huh?
It is vast and enormously varied.
How many, and we'll get to that in a second, but how many countries are we talking about? It's
Honestly,
over 50, isn't it?
It's over 50,
Yeah.
and we have diplomatic representation in about 48 of them.
And the number of people is just staggering.
It's staggering. It's hundreds and hundreds of millions.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So many different countries, so many different cultures. Can you put your finger on anything that brings them all together? Is there a sense of core values involved in all of Africa?
You know, I think it's hard to answer that question without talking about basic core values that all of us share. You know, I think
as human beings.
As human beings, Africans are concerned about their children, about their children's future, about their economic welfare, about their ability to provide for themselves, to provide health care and retirement for themselves. They're concerned about their environments. They're considered about their reputations. But I don't think that distinguishes Africans. I think that's something we all share. And I think that's part of what I've learned in a career largely spent in Africa is that what we all have in common far outweighs any differences we might have.
Are there facts? Are there myths that we should just try to dispel for an American and Western audience as we sit and chat together?
No, I don't think there are. I think what's needed is balance and maybe slightly broader perspective. There are kidnappings, there are murders, there are rapes, there are atrocities committed in Africa and elsewhere. And yet there's a lot of other stuff happening in Africa and elsewhere. And I think often what seems to make it into the U.S. media is skews toward the more tragic end of the spectrum, and the advances the continent is seeing, the economic growth it's seeing, which is about 5 of the 10 largest economic growth countries in the world are in Africa. So I think there's more to it than that. That's not to say that element isn't there. I don't want to romanticize or oversimplify Africa. There are lots of challenges here, and a lot of Africans are tackling those challenges, but lots of opportunities and lots of good news too.
So challenges, yes, challenges, but also, as you say, we always used to say America is the land of opportunity. Just seems to suggesting that Africa is a land of opportunity.
I believe Africa to be the next land of opportunity.
Whoa. Is it because of the resources they have? Is it the talent? Is it the skills? Put your finger on that.
Yeah, it's a little bit all of those and some things beside. The resources, you know, I think the resources have always been there, and they've always been exploited. I think as far as they go, they're being tapped in a different way now. And I think African leaders and countries are also more sensitive to that, and they're looking for development that's sustainable, that isn't just taking the resources and shipping them off, but adding the value to those resources in place, processing them, creating industries and employment and economies around that potentiality. So that's one aspect of it. Also, really, just the fact that this is an extraordinarily young continent, and you know, with youth comes dynamism and energy and ideals, and that's playing out in Africa as well.
Has the United States kind of missed the boat somewhat in Africa?
No, I think not. But I think it's important to keep rowing, and I think we
diplomatically said.
We appreciate that. I think what we are doing is distinguishing our engagement from some other countries in that it has value added. You know, I think when we are working with countries, whether it's in social issues or issues of democracy and governance or economic and commercial activities. We don't just come and take or come and bring, we engage and we build capacity. And I think that is something that really resonates in Africa, and I think that we're not the only ones doing it, but I think we are distinguished in our ability to do that and appreciate it as a result.
I wonder sometimes, just to kind of continue down that path for a minute, if our own history has something to do with our lack of engagement in Africa, our lack of respect for Africa. Do I have anything there?
It's a very interesting question, and I imagine you do have something there. You know, part of it is language, part of it is we don't have that much of a shared history, and where we do have a shared history, it surrounds very, very difficult issues, slavery and exploitation. And I don't think anyone in Africa or in the United States should ever dismiss or minimize the significance of that part of our legacy. But I think more recently we have disengaged as a result, and we are now re-engaging. I think we, not just the government, but certainly the government, but also the private sector are recognizing that there's a lot that Africa brings to bear, and a lot of potential that is yet to be tapped.
You've served in half a dozen or more.
That's right, about a half
African
dozen,
countries. Yep. What do you love about Africa?
Well, again, it's hard to
Help me
speak it. Yeah, but the very first thing I loved about Africa was its cultural richness. You know, I came and I saw the expressions of cultures, traditional cultures, the dancing, the drumming, the carving, the fact that history is more a living, tangible thing there than something put down in writing and shelved in a library, and that it is perpetuated through oral traditions and dancing traditions. And that was the first thing that I really fell in love with. And then, again, to be simplistic, there's an enormous warmth, a human warmth on this continent. You know, I would even say perhaps a degree of social evolution that we either may not have had in America or we've lost over time, where people do take that time to make connections, to talk, to inquire about how other people are, in a way that you actually expect an answer and are interested in what that answer will be.
How do people in Africa see the United States right now?
Well, in my experience, they see it quite favorably, though, again, everything is nuanced. I think, as I mentioned earlier, they regard America and Americans as being giving, warm, there being a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity, a lot of warmth. I think enormous expectations attached to a country like America. And sometimes we may not live up to those expectations, either in matters of policy or in matters of how we as a society are seen at times.
Can you give a couple of examples or an example of that?
Yeah, I can try. I think if you hear anything negative about America, in my experience in Africa, it'll be, oh gosh, you know, mass shootings of children. How can you allow this? How is this okay? Yeah. Or you've allowed a very inflammatory video against Islam to be posted on YouTube. You know, well, I understand freedom of speech, but how can you allow an entire religion and millions of people to be insulted in that way. So it's just areas in which they have a different approach than we do to how you might do things, and don't quite understand how we end up where we do in terms of some of our freedoms and some of the consequences of those freedoms.
French influence here, Portuguese, British, German, Dutch, and now Chinese, huh?
Indeed.
Are we matching that Chinese commitment now to Africa and also to Benin?
We are, but it's different, and it goes a little bit to what I was alluding to earlier, this notion of value-added engagement. And I think what the Chinese are doing in Africa is very important. I think it's got a particular emphasis on infrastructure, and Africa is in sore need of infrastructure.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So, if you've got a major world power that's willing to invest significant resources in building Africa's infrastructure, that's a good thing. And that's not against what America is looking to see happen in Africa at all. I think our engagement is different, and it is a bit more not just sort of coming in and building a road, but sort of building a healthcare system and teaching people how to administer that healthcare system, and helping build that sort of capacity. So that is something that sustains, even if for whatever reason our engagement changes in a year or 10.
Your job as ambassador, what's day to day your activity? What's your mission here?
Thank you. Well, that's actually two different questions.
Okay.
But how I fill my day
is
there's two broad thrusts to my job. One is sort of the outward focus, and the other is the inward focus. And the outward focus is the predominant one, and that's engaging with Beninese, whether it's the president or his cabinet, or members of civil society, non-governmental organizations, the media, individual Beninese who are seeking to interact with us in various ways. We've created a council of young Beninese we call the Youth Council that I meet with regularly, who give us the youth perspective on what's going on here. Other members of the diplomatic corps here to see if we are engaging in Benin in ways that are complementary, and explaining America to Beninese, and learning from Beninese what their priorities are and how we share those priorities and how we can support each other in pursuit of those priorities. And that's a lot of meetings, that's a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversations, a few of the stereotypical evening cocktail parties as well. But it's really just, it's that sort of open communication, and we have very good relations with the Beninese authorities, so we can speak very candidly and in a very friendly and constructive way in sharing these perspectives.
How about potential for U.S. investment in Benin and in West Africa?
Well, I think it's strong. I think Benin offers a lot of possibilities. It also offers a lot of challenges, and part of my job is to encourage U.S. commercial interest in Benin, to help them identify these opportunities, and also to help them understand and navigate some of the challenges they might face. In terms of the possibilities for investment, we talked about infrastructure. That's, I think, at the top of the list. And the government of Benin recognizes that and places that as a priority. Again, issues of energy, roads, transportation infrastructure more generally.
That rail thing that...
There is a yes, it's called the Backbone Project, which is a project that seeks to connect many of the West African countries by rail. One of the things you will see in a country like Benin is that it's small. It's surrounded by some very big economies, Ghana, Nigeria, for example. For Benin to be a player, it needs to be a player in a way that fosters regional integration, and regional economic integration, I think, is an important aspect of that. So integrating the region's infrastructure would be hugely beneficial to Benin's economic development.
A couple of last questions, Mr. Ambassador. Family, but they're back in the States, huh? That's a difficult thing for you. Do you get back and forth, or the youngsters were raised in Africa, weren't they?
That's right. Yes, my kids are both in college at this stage, but even now they've spent more of their lives in Africa than in America. Wow.
Boy, what an experience for them. Huh?
Indeed. In fact, my son loves Africa so much that he's going to do his junior year study abroad in Uganda next year.
President Obama is having a big conference of leaders from all the African countries. What should we keep our eyes on when this happens?
Well, if you live in Washington, watch out for traffic jams, but I don't think that's what you have in mind.
A lot of heads of state with a lot of entourage.
A lot of logistical. It's a lot of people coming all at the same time. But it's a terrifically important and exciting opportunity. This is the first time that an American president has hosted all of the African heads of state, and essentially, except for a very small number with whom we have strained or no relations, it is all of the African heads of state. It's really important. As I said at the outset, Africa is the continent of the future, and building connections with Africa's leaders is an important part of making sure that we can support Africa's trajectory that is democratic and peaceful and tolerant and prosperous. And this is a big step in that direction, building common understanding with Africa's leaders, sharing with them our vision for our shared future, and listening to them and listening how we can participate in their creation of Africa's future. This is extraordinarily important, so a very exciting moment for us.
Mr. Ambassador, just thank you and your staff, your team, for hospitality here. This is just a wonderful way to wrap up our visit to Benin and our first visit to this particular part of the world, and we thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
For information about This Is America and the World and online video for all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net. And now you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and the F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings, and Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.